Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another Epidose of this crazy carnivore project here. Today's video is a little bit different format than the previous ones. I did an interview with somebody remotely, and I used some different technology. And in spite of all that, it was clearly worth it. I still can't believe that I got to interview Temple Grandin of all people. So she's an expert in the livestock industry. She's an expert in autism, and she's been around for a while, learning a lot. She's got a lot to pass on. She's a prolific author. I'm sure a lot of people know there was a motion picture made about her life, and she's still a professor in Colorado State University. So it was my complete honor to have some of her time and get to talk to her a little bit here and there. Fortunately, I got to talk to her a little bit more than I expected, just setting this up. So she was very accommodating. Unfortunately, we had to use a different format of video than I'm used to, so there's a couple extra challenges. And some of the video seemed to have frozen up at some point, but I'm going to go back and rehash all that and see if I can figure out what went wrong with the last half of the video, maybe repost this video later. But for now, I wanted to get this content out because a lot of people were eagerly waiting to see what she had to say. And so without too much more delay, let's see what a conversation with Temple Grandin is like. Let's see what she has to say about the livestock industry and about the autistic community. And again, everybody, thanks for watching. Maybe send this video to somebody who's going to appreciate it or somebody who might help. And if you could subscribe, I'd appreciate that because it really helps me. And I'd like to make many more videos like this one, if only. So thanks again for watching.
I was.
Okay, maybe we better get started again. I'm sorry about that, but I did need to talk to her.
Yeah, no worries. I understand. You're a busy lady.
Yeah.
So I was saying I really like your glass walls project, and I was wondering if you had an opinion on some of the rules that the industry had against filming and stuff like that. If that really hurt public opinion about commercial slaughter and livestock industry.
Well, the reason for doing the glass walls was to show what goes on in a plant. And one of the reasons why they get worried about filming is they just wait until something bad happens if they're against the industry and show something bad. Now, when we shot those videos, we didn't go cherry picking over stuff. They were done very quickly. We just walked into the plant and filmed what they had there. And we didn't have enough footage to cherry pick it. Mm-hmm. We just played the footage that we had because that slaughter part of those videos was filmed in one of the videos in a single morning. That included all the outdoor stuff at the stockyards. I mean, we just went in and did it.
Very nice. So it's kind of a guerrilla operation, just rolling.
Well, they knew we were there, of course, but yeah. It wasn't like we shot 2 hours of stunning and then picked out the best 5 minutes of the footage. We did not do that.
Yeah.
We didn't have 2 hours of footage, not even close.
Right. Have you seen any of the propaganda films like Cowpiracy where they kind of highlight the worst of the industry in the past?
Well, basically, it gets down to, do you want to fix the industry and reform it or get rid of it? Okay, I am on the side where I want to fix and reform the industry because I have to eat meat. Like a lot of people on the autism spectrum, I got to have some animal protein. I actually tried a vegan diet. I cannot function on it. I get all lightheaded. Mm-hmm. Now, I feel very strongly we've got to raise animals right. In fact, right now, some of the big problems I'm seeing, some of the large plants, is a welfare issue I have to fix at the farm. Mm-hmm. Not an issue that I can fix at the plant. You know, one of the really bad ones is some dairy producers allow a dairy cow to deteriorate to a very bad condition before she's brought to slaughterhouse. That did not happen at the slaughterhouse.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I seem to remember some problems like that. I live near Chino, California, and you might remember some of the stuff that was in the news a number of years ago with the downer cows.
It was terrible. Some of that stuff was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
And this brings up the thing where you have to supervise people. There's been things that have worked on improving the industry. One of the big things, and I worked on implementing this 20 years ago, were the McDonald's audits. And when you have a big customer insisting that their suppliers do things a certain way, things get improved. And I developed a very simple way to evaluate it. And that worked. You also have to have management that wants to do things right. Because when I did those original project on 75 big beef and pork plants, 3 plants had to have the manager fired because we had to change the management. The top sets the tone for doing things right. I don't care what kind of a business it is.
Sure.
That is true.
That makes sense. Do you have any ideas on what sort of laws going forward might help the livestock industry?
Well, I've been working in the meat industry for 47 years, and I have found, like in the U.S., and I made this conclusion back almost 30 years ago, that some of the biggest change takes place when customers want things. That was 20 years ago for that. I saw more improvements in slaughterhouses when we started the McDonald's audits. And the thing is, in most of the plants, we didn't have to totally rebuild them. A lot of repairs. Number one problem with captive bolt stunning was lack of maintenance and not repairing equipment. Lots of non-slip flooring had to be put in because flooring wears out. And out of the 75 pork and beef plants, only 3 had to build something expensive in order to get their handling and their stunning up to a really high standard. And management, that's the other really, really big thing. And I think especially in the U.S., and I've felt this way ever since we did the McDonald's audits, that the thing that's going to bring about the biggest change is big customers insisting on standards. And that's going to apply to all kinds of different things.
So you think the livestock and meat industry is continuing to improve?
Well, yes. I mean, I've actually, Tyson's been doing a lot of stuff now on getting antibiotics out of chicken feed. There's they respond to what consumers are going to buy. That's one of the things that happens. And I have a book called Improving Animal Welfare, Practical Approach, the textbook. It's unfortunately a little more expensive than I would like. Textbooks, they just charge more money for them.
Sure.
And it's aimed at people that are going to run a supply chain to make sure that they do stuff right. And how do you go about doing this? And if I'm running a supply chain, the first thing I got to do is make sure that really bad stuff is not going on a farm. They're not doing things like hitting dairy cows with gate rods or something really terrible like that. That stuff's not going on. And then you score them for things like lameness, skinniness, dirtiness. I can score them for that. And then I can tell, is that dairy improving or is that dairy becoming worse?
So what do you see a need for any change in education as far as livestock goes?
Well, there's some real bright spots. One thing the National Cattlemen's Association has done is stockmanship training. Handling is one area that's improved. It's not perfect, but more and more ranchers are getting involved in doing lower stress handling, which is a really good thing. That has improved. But I also have some concerns about what I call biological system overload, where you push that biology too hard to gain really rapidly. You can do it with genetics. Or you could push it with too much grain in the feed. There's some situations there they need to back off. The problem is people don't see optimal. I'll also bash pets on this. They kept breeding for such a massive head on the bulldog. It can't breathe, it can't walk, and it can't have its puppies naturally. So I'm going to bash pets just as bad as I'm going to bash livestock on breeding animals that have problems. And this is one of my biggest welfare concerns today, both in livestock and also in pets.
Yeah, I'll take that opportunity to ask you a question. A friend was asking friends if they had any questions to ask for you. One of my friends is looking for these baby doll sheep. Are you aware of people keeping breeds like that going?
Well, I know that there's a cat that they've bred to be a dwarf. There's a lot of animals where you breed things that are an abnormality. Actually, the basset hound is a dwarf. Now, if you do that in moderation, the basset hound is okay. He's fine. But you overdo some of those traits, then you're going to get back problems. The same thing with the dachshund. So the thing that I care about the most is that an animal is functional. It's not going to have mobility problems or pain or breathing problems or problems giving birth naturally, doing its basic functions. And you over-select for any trait in an animal, I don't care what the trait is, an appearance trait, maybe in a pet, a performance trait, production trait in a farm animal, you are going to wreck your animal, period. And I have a textbook called Genetics and the Behavior of Domestic Animals, and I talk about problems with over-selection for single traits. Animals have got to function. You see, and the problem with some of these problems is that they occur slowly. Like lameness might gradually get worse at dairy, and people don't see it because they're not measuring it. And I'm a big proponent of measuring lameness, measuring skinny cows. How many do you have? Are your cows dirty? You get used to looking at dirty cows, you don't see them. See, I'm a visual thinker, so I see these things.
Right. Very good. In the livestock industry overall, do you see some of the larger producers shifting away from actual animals and moving towards synthetic meats or pea protein derivatives or anything like that?
Well, the Impossible Burger is a GMO.
Right.
The heme that makes it red, that you get out of the soybean, the natural soybean doesn't make enough of it. You have to have a genetically engineered bacteria grow it.
Right.
That heme is a GMO. Another thing about GMOs, a lot of people don't know what the first GMO is. It's not Roundup Ready anything. It's insulin. Insulin is the first GMO. And you used to get insulin from the pancreas glands of cattle and pigs. And then in the late 70s, they engineered bacteria to grow human insulin. That's what they did. And then they phased out the pancreas glands. But I was just at a veterinary conference yesterday. I was down in the trade show, and I was looking at dog insulin, and insulin for pets is still coming from pigs.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Must be expensive.
Well, there's a lot of, well, also another thing is just unconscionable is what some of these, how the prices have gotten jacked up on some of this stuff. Insulin's a very, very old thing. It should not be costing so much that you've got a young college student rationing insulin and then dying. Well, don't get me on the
Yes.
subject of medical care. I get real hot about that subject.
I think we both do. Do you see many opportunities in the future for new cattle ranchers, maybe smaller independent cattle ranchers or processors?
Well, what I think is going to happen, and I think our beer industry is a good model. Right here in Fort Collins, where I live, right here at Colorado State University, we've got the great big huge Budweiser plant. Then we have several hundred little small craft brewers. And if they stay below a certain size, they stay off the radar, the big guys. So they coexist. Now, the craft brewer gets too big, then Bud moves and wants to assimilate them like the Borg. And I think a similar thing is going to happen with other products, meat, vegetables, other things where you're going to get niche markets that can sell locally, and they coexist. There's room in the marketplace for both. Also, there's a lot of things that big ag can learn from little ag. Let's take probiotics, for example. 20 years ago, big ag stuck their nose up at that. They don't anymore. There's a lot of things now they're learning from little ag, but they don't want to admit it. The other thing, when you get about big, what I've learned in working with big, it's not bad, it's fragile.
Interesting.
There was a plant that had a big fire recently, and it made a big mess in the cattle market. Big, it's fragile. I remember traveling through Kansas in 2007, and 4 miles of those great big Eiffel Tower electric towers were bent over in half. Yeah, that could shut down a plant or two.
I can
Now,
imagine.
there was another row of towers that stayed up. But if 2 rows of towers had fallen, then those plants would have had no power supply. Big, it's fragile. And this, you see, I think visually I'm an associative thinker, so now I'm seeing an article where I read about a lady where there was a lot of floods and the power's off, and she says, I wasn't scared until I went into the supermarket and they were stripping the shelves. Then I got scared.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It seems like we're, just based on the internet model, we should know that dispersed models are much more robust than large concentrated organizations.
Well, and then the thing is, these large supply chains, when they're working, they work great. They're very, very efficient. One thing we're very lucky in this country is that we'll never have to depend on shipping containers and ships to bring our food in. There are other places that depend on shipping containers.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have to depend on that. We'll never have to depend on that. When the shipping company went on strike several years ago, no, actually it was going bankrupt. It wasn't a strike. Got mixed up there. It went bankrupt. So the ship was sailing around out international waters, and it didn't want to come into port because the bank was seizing. Our Christmas presents were on that ship, not our food. A whole bunch of stuff we probably don't really need was on that ship.
Right.
We're lucky that we don't have to depend on shipping containers for our food.
Yeah, that's a good point. Do you have much opinion about the sort of rising of the regenerative agricultural movement?
I am a big fan of that. We've got to get the cattle and the grazing animals back on the land. We had a seminar here at Colorado State about 3 years ago, and someone in our department invited a crop scientist to our student seminar, and I went to that seminar. I'm very glad I did. And this is an example of going outside the boundaries of different things. And I learned from the crop scientist that our best cropland in the U.S., in Iowa and Illinois, was created by herds of grazing bison. We got to get our grazing animals, our sheep, our goats, and our cattle back on the land as part of a crop rotation, where we're not doing monoculture. See, the problem with monoculture, it works great in the short run. In the long run, you get in trouble. Mm-hmm. After all, the weeds got immune to Roundup. Mm-hmm. And put livestock on a cover crop in is one of the crops that you do. But unfortunately, there's economic incentives that promote monoculture. We have them here in the U.S. They also have them in Europe, and it's promoting problems. Mm-hmm. But integrating animals are part of the land. That's what I learned from this seminar. And you use the animals on the land right, they improve the land. You use them wrong, it wrecks the land. I'm a big fan of rotational grazing, and that's very locally site-specific. But we've got innovative people in regenerative agriculture. Big ag will eventually follow them. Little guys innovate. I don't care what industry you're in. Little guys innovate. Doesn't matter if it's electronics or computers or it's farming.
Right. Yeah, I see your point. I think you're very right. They kind of lead the industry with a tiny leash that has a lot of effect.
At first, the industry resists, but then eventually they quietly do it. The other thing I learned: sell your own product. Don't trash the competition. The emphasis needs to be on showing what you do. Another thing that helped me improve things in the cattle industry is I wrote about cattle handling stuff I did. So if you're doing regenerative agriculture, write about how you do it. Leave the politics out. Mm-hmm. Just write about how you do it on your farm, how you made it work. Sell your own product.
Yeah, I think oftentimes the best criticism is just doing something better than somebody else. Not really saying.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, that was some great answers. I really appreciate it. Of course, you're kind of an expert, so I got a handful of questions about autistic people in general. What are your thoughts on autistic people in general entering the workforce? I mean, what sort of...
I spent 25 years working with construction. I would sell a project, do the drawings for the project, supervise its construction, and then start up the project. These big cattle handling and pig handling systems. I'm going to estimate that about 20% of the skilled tradespeople I worked with were either autistic, undiagnosed, dyslexic, or ADHD. And I'm talking high-end skilled trades, building big, complicated things. And we are losing skills. And this is a great job for the visual thinkers like me. I know a guy right now who only has a high school education. He builds entire food processing plants. In fact, we are losing skills. Pork processing plant, chicken processing plant, we're importing all the stuff from Germany right now. And the reason for that is we took the skilled trades out 25 years ago. But the problem with us visual thinkers is we can't do algebra. So we're screened out of a lot of things. this brings up my other stuff I talk about, the different kinds of minds. You've got the visual thinkers. You've also got the mathematical thinkers, the pattern thinkers, and you got the word thinkers. Now, in autism, you have all three of those kinds of thinkers. But an autistic person will often be like really good at visual thinking, absolutely horrible at algebra, really good at math, maybe have some trouble with reading, really good at stuff with words. And we need the different kinds of minds. And actually, in this country, we have lost skills in things like building elevators. Just check out the nameplate on an elevator the next time you go somewhere. If it's a new one, it will not be an Otis, because we don't know how to make them anymore.
Wow.
And we need our visual thinkers. I want to emphasize, not everybody with autism is a visual thinker.
Right.
A lot of people out in Silicon Valley. I've been out to Silicon Valley. Half those programmers are on the spectrum, undiagnosed.
Sure.
The other thing we need to be doing on the workforce is kids need to be learning working skills. When I was 13, my mother got me a little sewing job, and when I was 15, I was cleaning horse stalls. Need to be learning working skills. And there's so many back doors into jobs. I just talked to a lady. I was just at this big veterinary conference, and I had a veterinarian come up to me, and she had a relative that now does lighting for major shows, and he loved the lighting, the electronic lighting. Now he's doing lighting for things like Cirque du Soleil. And that's something you go in the back door. You go in the back door, you just start lugging cases. You just go in as a laborer, lugging cases. Next thing you know, you're running the lights. That's going in the back door. I've seen similar things in these big food plants. Somebody gets a job on the line, and then they gravitate over to the maintenance shop. 10 years later, they're building the big, gigantic new plant addition. That's a back door into specialized employment. The other thing is people have got to see the doors. When in the movie, there's a scene where I get the editor's card. And I knew if I wrote for the farm magazine, that would help my career. I had the guts to go up and get the card. But I also saw the door. And then I produced the article. But I do a lot of talks in some big places that have fancy stages. Talk to a lot of those people in the back that do the lighting, do the sound. I've had them come up to me, and one of them said to me, "Oh, I'm almost sure our sound guy's on the autism spectrum, but he is so good. He does the sound so perfectly." That would have been a job getting in the back door. That's somebody that I just talked to him within the last year. And these people are older. But I think about skilled trades, designer, drafting people I worked with. I worked with 3 brilliant visual thinkers on drafting. One was definitely autistic. The other 2 were not.
Yeah. Well, and what sort of advice for, say, young autistic people who are considering going to school or continuing education or college?
When you say young autistic people, what age?
Well, perhaps like high school age or so.
Well, there's certain kids, I'm not saying skilled trades are for everybody, but taking out all the vocational classes is the worst thing schools ever did.
Sure. Because
those quirky, different kinds of people, and I worked with them, we are actually losing skills in what I call the clever engineering department. You need us. This whole mess with the Boeing airplanes. The first mistake that was made was a visual thinking mistake. You trusted a single sensor that's about the size of a Sharpie pen, and you wired it directly to the flight controls without telling the pilots. See how basic that gets? Visual thinker wouldn't have made that mistake. You need us. And we're getting screened out. And then our mathematical thinkers, we got a lot of them in Silicon Valley. And the thing that's interesting, when I go to big major tech companies, is they tend to avoid the labels. That this is what I see. You see, nothing's abstract to me. But I'm making a point now when I do my talks. Yesterday I was at a veterinarian meeting. Then I'm going to be going to an autism talk. Then I've done talks at big corporations with their diversity and disability department. Then I'm out at a plant or at a feedlot or someplace like that. I like this jumping between the silos. You've got to break the barriers down between the silos. And so the first thing I do on figuring out maybe what a person can do for a job is I've got to see what their skills are. I've got to ask basic questions. Can you read and write at the 6th grade level? You can run a Fortune 500 company reading and writing at 6th grade level. I have seen it. But you do need to read and write at that level. Then I got to go. Are you a visual person, a math guy, a word guy? Now, my book, The Autistic Brain, I provide the science behind the different kinds of minds. I provide the science to show that there really are different kinds of minds. And there's some people, I just learned this just about a month ago, that there's a thing called aphantasia. These are people that have no visual thinking at all, but they can do math well.
Interesting.
They're rare. I've talked to a few of them. Now I know it has a name, aphantasia.
Wow. Yeah, we're always learning, aren't we?
We're always learning, and I want to see people, get out there and be successful. That's what I want to see.
So if you were to suggest some changes to the education system, it would probably be putting in more skills training, right? More trades.
We're putting in more skills training, and don't make algebra a prerequisite. You need to have your old-fashioned math up through 6th grade the way it used to be taught. That I knew how to do. I was just talking at the veterinary meeting. What about our vet techs? Do they need algebra? No. But dosing of drugs, they have to do that in their sleep. That's non-negotiable. But that's not algebra. That's an old-fashioned 6th grade math.
Yeah, I like to make the joke that they force us to learn algebra, but they don't teach us how to do our taxes.
But that's the problem. Kids are not learning bank account. Right. They're not learning shopping. These basic skills. Driving's another one. There's problems with multitasking, and I'm very lucky that on my aunt's ranch, the mailbox was 3 miles away. So in a week, I got 36 miles of practice with no traffic. Because of issues with multitasking, and I can't do multitasking, driving's going to take longer. They need to practice longer in a really safe place, starting with a big parking lot. Get it into motor memory. But if I hadn't learned to drive, I wouldn't have been able to do anything in the cattle industry.
Yeah, it's a good point. Some of those rudimentary skills are essential to moving forward in life.
Well, I think, kids that are in the educational pipeline now, I want to start the work training, chores in the home. If they belong to a church, a community center, anything like that, a job, a volunteer job where they're on a schedule outside the home when they're 11 and 12, instant they're legal. They need to go into the workforce. Now, what we have to be careful about is don't throw them in the deep end. I can think of specific jobs that will not work. Super busy takeout window at McDonald's will not work. Now, if the only thing is available is a place like McDonald's or Burger King, then we put them on in the afternoon shift when they're less busy and we don't shove them on the window. A other little tip is, since I have no working memory, if someone explains to me how to clean the ice cream machine and put it back together again, I can't remember the steps. You've got to give the person a pilot's checklist. Step 1, step 2, step 3. Do not load working memory. And a pilot's checklist for how to tear down and clean an ice cream machine is an easy thing to make. Don't write a book. You can actually look up pilot's checklist online. You're looking at 1 to 3 keywords for each thing that just jogs the memory. Because I don't have sequence memory. So those are things that you can do. The other thing the manager needs to understand, if the person comes in dressed like a total slob, I was pulled aside and told that being a slob was not acceptable. That was done with me. I thank that boss now.
Yeah, somebody's got to do it along the way. So do you have any new books or videos coming out?
Well, I'm right now updating my livestock. I've just updated my livestock handling book, my big textbook, and I've got a book on slaughter that's going to be coming out. A textbook. Unfortunately, these will be expensive books. I recently came out with a book called Calling All Minds. It's my childhood projects, kites, parachutes, things that I made as a child that I had to tinker with. A lot of kids today are too afraid to make a mistake. I had to tinker and tinker and tinker to get some of my kites to work, weighting down the wings with just the right amount of tape, bending the flaps up just like a modern jet, just the right way. The jets didn't have wingtip flap, little winglets when I was messing around with that. I invented winglets for planes. Somebody else did the patent for it on the real plane. But you have to tinker to get these things to work. And kids are so afraid of making a mistake. And you see, if you do practical things, cooking, sewing, woodworking, welding, sometimes you make a mistake and you have to learn from that mistake. I wrecked a sewing project when I was about 12 because I cut the fabric too fast. And I cut it wrong. I had to throw away the whole project. the practical world, you sometimes will have mistakes. Now let's look at skilled trades where you can really make the money. If you're a welder and you can read drawings, you've got to learn how to read drawings. You will find work for life. If you've got a welding unit on the back of your truck, you will have work for life. Electricians, plumbers, you will have work for life. Mechanics for cars, boats, airplanes, trucks.
Good jobs. Yeah,
you
absolutely.
will have big trucks. You will have a job for life. Artificial intelligence is going to take out some high-end medical jobs that are knowledge jobs, like dermatologists, rheumatologists, internal medicine. Those are going to come out way before anybody replaces a truck mechanic with a computer. I'm talking high-end skilled trades. I'm not talking about roofing or plasterboarding, so sheetrocking. I'm not talking about that kind of stuff. Floor tiles, no. High-end skilled trades. And people stick their nose up at it. But this is the reason why the Europeans are making elevators and we're not.
Yeah, no, I think there was a push at some point. Everybody had to go to college. That was the way. And part of that might have been just that it was so higher education was heavily subsidized and the schools are charging more and they're just trying to get people in. But I remember when I was a kid, everybody was like, you're going to college whether you like it or not. That was, doesn't matter if you don't know what you're going to do, you're going to go to college, you know. And instead of learning a trade, you know, and like you said.
Well, the thing is, I want to emphasize high-end skilled trades. Like we've built a lot of new buildings here on our campus, and they were looking for electricians. Let's talk about unconventional career paths. Here's what you can do with a political science degree. This person was project manager on our beautiful new chemistry building. She took me around on the site. She started out answering phones for a construction company. This is backdoor. Then she started working on some bidding. Next thing you know, she's running the project for our new chemistry building with a 4-year political science degree. I think that's a real good use for that degree. But that's an example of a job going in the back door. And a real decent job.
Sure. Yeah. Sounds like it. Well, let me ask you a little bit about your personal dietary choices. You already mentioned you like to have a little, you need to have a little animal protein, and the vegan diet didn't work for you. So
I can't function on a vegan diet, so I've got to have some animal protein. But I also make a point of eating lots of fresh fruits and veggies. I make a point of doing that. You know, of course, I eat out a whole lot, so I'll order meat and I'll get veggies with it.
Right.
You know, when you look at some of the health problems maybe associated with too much meat, a lot of people that are heavy meat eaters are filling up on French fries and a bunch of other stuff is not very healthy.
Right.
I think some problems are the lack of having vegetables and fruit, and I eat a lot of fresh fruit. And I don't use any blenders or juicers because that jacks up the glycemic index. Another little rule I have is no calories from drinks. It's water or black coffee. And maybe once a week when I'm out at a meeting, I'll have 1 glass of wine. That's it. All these sugared drinks, I totally avoid that. Otherwise, I'd be. And too much bread, I avoid. You know, there was a while back when they were advertising bagels and bread as low-fat health food. I made the mistake of believing that, and I gained 30 pounds. And then after I banned big amounts of bread and bagels from my diet, I managed to get the weight off. I'm just saying what works for me.
Is there any particular cuts of meat that you prefer?
Well, of course, you know, you like the good stuff, but I mean, I eat plenty of hamburger too. I mean, it's and I like bacon. I like a lot of the stuff. I think on a lot of things it's moderation, but I find that if I go without animal protein for more than 2 days, I actually get lightheaded.
Interesting.
And I think there are genetic differences in this. That doesn't mean you eat a pound of steak a day.
Well,
and you also I don't, you know, it probably takes I remember reading something about a proper serving of meats the size of a deck of cards, and that would probably work. You know, you don't have to, but I do have to have it.
So, do you have any personal philosophy on just, you know, when it comes to developing your own personal skills, you know, or something that you're having a difficulty with? How do you tend to approach that?
Well, you got to learn from your mistakes. You see, when I was a little kid and I was making the bird kites and little projects I have in my book, Calling All Minds, I had to tinker. You learn from mistakes. But you got kids today where they've never made a mistake, and that's not good. Another problem I had to deal with was anxiety. A lot of people on the spectrum have problems with anxiety,
Yes.
and I discuss this in my book, Thinking in Pictures. I've been on antidepressant medication for 39 years. Best thing that ever happened to me. And some of the visual thinking, us visual thinkers, we're panic monsters. Now, I worked with 3 other visual thinkers that were doing design work. One autistic, one, the other 2 definitely not. They're all on low-dose Prozac. And if they weren't on low-dose Prozac, they'd be in the gutter on drugs and alcohol. And what the antidepressant does is it stops the anxiety. But the mistake that people make with antidepressants is too high a dose. For a lot of people, the label dose is too high. You might only need half the starter dose for a drug like Lexapro or Zoloft. And you take too high a dose, you will get agitation and insomnia. It's just that simple. And then doctors are raising doses when they ought to be cut. I'm sick and tired of reading scientific papers talking about activation from antidepressants. They're on too high a dose. Back off. But that medication saved me. And if you want to read my personal experiences, you can read about it in Thinking in Pictures. And even though that is old now, the medical information in that book is still accurate. The meds have not changed that much. This is why I have to drink water.
Did you want to speculate on what you think the causes of autism are?
Oh, genetics is a very, very big part of it. A lot of little genes. I read a very interesting paper. It's called Genomic Trade-Offs. Are autism and schizophrenia the same, the steep price for a human brain? The same genes that make the brain big, give us a huge big brain, also cause autism and schizophrenia. It's a whole lot of little tiny SNPs and nucleotide variations in the brain. There is no autism gene. I had my complete genome scanned, everything, and I found out the anxiety. It found that. It found out why my nails break off, why my skin is horrible, why my teeth are half missing. But it didn't explain the autism. Yeah, I got a few at-risk genes. And what I've noticed is if you take 2 computer programmers and you put them together and one's probably undiagnosed with autism, your chance of getting autistic kids is great. It's a complex trait. It's a continuous trait. You know, when you breed 2 different kinds of dog together, you get a dog that's kind of half and half. That's not Mendelian genetics. So genetics is a very, very big part of it. There's also another fascinating paper I found called Solitary Mammals as a model for autism. You see, a brain can be more social or a brain can be more cognitive. Now, lions are more social than leopards and panthers. Are panthers defective? No. But there's crossover with autism genetics. It's complicated.
Sure.
I think in the milder versions, it's a variation. And then, of course, you get no speech. Yeah, obviously, that's an abnormality. It's a continuous trait.
Is there any ongoing autistic research out there that has you excited?
The most important thing they need to be doing on research is how to deal with sensory problems. And there's an interesting paper called Environmental Enrichment is an Effective Treatment for Autism. Environmental enrichment is an effective treatment for autism. Now, it's an adjunct to other types of therapies. And what you do is stimulate 2 senses at the same time, like maybe listen to classical music and touch a cold water glass. And I think what it does is desensitizes. And you're always changing the 2 stimuli. Another thing I've found very effective on sound sensitivity is if the child can control the sound. So let's say he hates the hairdryer or the vacuum cleaner. Let him play with it or her play with it, where the person turns it on and off. That's worked with vacuum cleaners. It's also worked with the buzzer on the scoreboard at the gym. They took the child down to the gym where he could press the button and do the buzzer. And then he started playing music on it. You see, the thing that's important is the control of the horrible stimulus. Now, that's something simple that you can do. And one mom told me that her child that was afraid of the vacuum cleaner got to loving it when he could control it.
Yeah, I can see how that would alleviate some anxiety once you have control over over the stimulus.
Well, you see, it stops the sudden big startle response. That's what it does.
Mm-hmm.
But I think, to me, the sensory oversensitivities be my number one research priority. Absolutely. And ways to treat those, because they can really interfere with your life.
Interesting.
Now, some of those problems got less when I'm on one antidepressant, old dicipramine. It saved me. I'm on an old drug that was around before Prozac got invented.
Interesting.
No, it saved me.
Oh.
And it also helped with a lot of stress-related health problems like colitis. In the HBO movie, I was eating yogurt and Jell-O. After I went on the antidepressants, the colitis cleared up. Not 100%, but 90%.
Interesting. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense in my own experience. Fascinating. Well, I ran out of questions.
Okay, well,
I appreciate your
it's
time.
been really good to talk to everybody. And if you want to read about the different kinds of minds, that's in my book called The Autistic Brain. And then in Thinking in Pictures, that's where I talk about my anxiety. If you have anxiety, my personal experiences with anxiety and with medication would be things that are useful. And then I've got my Way I See It book. That's a lot of little short articles, really good book for teachers and parents of young kids.
Excellent. Yeah, we talk about your books in my groups all the time, so it comes up. My friend Karina, she's Swiss, and she's constantly posting quotes from you. So there's this constant ongoing dialogue about your work.
I want to see these kids get out there and be successful, because I worked with so many people. I mean, I think of some of these, like a welding person, a guy who was brilliant at drafting, could design anything, a guy who could build anything. And some of them have even discussed their childhoods. There's a guy that's ADHD, dyslexic, socially awkward, terrible student, you name it, he had it, took welding, started making stuff and selling it, owns a big metal fabrication company. You see, this is what bothers me as I go back and forth between the silos. Is the people, then there's another guy now that by himself now doing lighting for Cirque du Soleil, because when he was a little kid, he wasn't that interested in the performance, but he loved how the lights work. Now he's controlling the lights.
Right.
That's a perfect job. And he went in the back door. You know how you get in the back door? You're going to have to roll and lift a lot of those big, heavy cases. That's where you start.
Yeah.
And then, a few years later, you can end up running stuff. And you're going to have to climb up a lot of stuff.
I'm sure.
That's how you start in that job. I've talked to a lot of those stage people that put that stuff up. And I know there's people on the spectrum there loving those jobs.
Yeah, that sounds like some good advice. Right
Now,
there.
some of the people are going to Silicon Valley, but that's not for everybody. Certainly not for me.
Right.
So I tend to get really interested in the jobs that would be for us visual thinkers. The lighting would be a visual thinking job.
Yeah, you're not going to have somebody who's dyslexic doing coding,
No. See, visual thinkers aren't going to do coding.
Right.
But visual thinkers are going to do interfaces. Steve Jobs was an artist. That's why your phone's easy to use. The engineers had to make it work. That's the different kinds of minds working together.
Excellent point. All right. Well, did you have anything else you wanted to
Well,
add?
I'm going to have to go work on my student's paper right now with her. She came in just as we started, and I've got to go see her now.
Okay. Well, I appreciate your time. It's been great talking to you. It's been great getting to know you over the last day or two. So I really appreciate it, and that's been a big deal for me. So.
Okay, well, really, really good to talk to you.
Good talking to you,
Guess
too.
we'll sign off now.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you.